For more than 3 decades, one property has remained unlike any other in the world. It wasn't a palace, it wasn't a castle, and it certainly wasn't just another celebrity mansion. It was Neverland Ranch, a place where steam trains circled quiet hills, exotic animals roamed private grounds, and carnival rides stood ready to welcome children from around the world. For millions of people, Neverland became almost as famous as the man who created it, Michael Jackson, the king of pop. But today, if you travel to the ranch, you won't hear the whistle of a locomotive. You won't see a Ferris wheel turning against the California sky, and you certainly won't find the magical world that once captivated millions. Instead, you'll discover something very different, a quiet estate hidden behind locked gates, an estate that few people have entered in recent years, a place surrounded by mystery, rumors, and unanswered questions across the internet. Countless videos claim Neverland has finally been opened. Some promise abandoned treasures, others speak of hidden rooms, forgotten possessions, or shocking discoveries left untouched for nearly 2 decades. The headlines are dramatic, the stories are captivating, but what really happened behind those famous gates? To answer that question, we have to go back to a time before Neverland even existed, long before Michael Jackson transformed the property into a private fantasy world. It was simply known as Sycamore Valley Ranch, a peaceful stretch of nearly 2,700 acres in the rolling hills of California's Santa Ynez Valley. There were no amusement rides, no zoo, no famous entrance, only open fields, towering oak trees, a beautiful lake, and a quiet ranch that attracted little public attention. Almost no one imagined that this ordinary piece of land would one day become one of the most recognizable private properties on Earth. Then Michael Jackson saw it. He had visited the ranch years before while spending time in the area. Something about the landscape stayed with him. The silence, the beauty, the freedom. It offered something he had searched for throughout much of his life. A place to escape. A place where fame couldn't follow him. In 1988, Michael made one of the biggest purchases of his life. He bought the ranch for nearly $20 million, but he wasn't buying it simply to own another luxurious home. He had something far more ambitious in mind. He wanted to build the childhood he believed had been taken from him, a place inspired by imagination, wonder, and the timeless story of Peter Pan. That single decision would transform an ordinary California ranch into a place unlike anything the world had ever seen. A dream that would inspire millions, cost a fortune, and eventually become one of the most talked about properties in entertainment history. When Michael Jackson purchased Sycamore Valley Ranch in 1988, he didn't see an ordinary piece of land. He saw a possibility. Most people would have built a luxury mansion, added a swimming pool, perhaps a tennis court. Michael imagined something entirely different. He wanted to create a place where imagination could come to life, a place where children could forget hospitals, families could leave their worries behind, and happiness would always come first. The inspiration came from a story he had loved for years, Peter Pan, the magical island where children never grow old. Michael believed childhood was something precious, something that should never be forgotten. After spending his own early years rehearsing, recording music, and performing on stages around the world, he often spoke about feeling that he had missed many of the simple experiences other children enjoyed. Neverland became his opportunity to build those memories, not only for himself, but for countless others. Almost immediately, construction began across the sprawling California property. The quiet ranch slowly transformed into something no one had ever attempted on private land. Roads were redesigned, gardens expanded, new buildings appeared. Every detail reflected Michael's imagination. Then came the attractions that would make Neverland famous. A full-sized Ferris wheel rose above the hills. A beautifully decorated carousel took shape nearby. There were bumper cars, a pirate ship ride, an octopus ride, a giant slide, and an entire amusement park that looked more like a family entertainment center than part of a private home. But Michael's vision didn't stop there. He wanted visitors to experience the excitement of arriving somewhere magical. So he built a working railroad, not a decorative display, but a real narrow-gauge railway complete with tracks, passenger cars, and a steam locomotive. The train carried guests through the estate, passing lakes, gardens, and open countryside before returning to the station. Even the station itself reflected the charm of an old-fashioned railroad. As construction continued, another extraordinary feature appeared, a private zoo. The ranch became home to giraffes, zebras, elephants, chimpanzees, tigers, and dozens of exotic birds. For many children visiting Neverland, seeing those animals up close became an unforgettable experience. The property also included a large theater for private movie screenings, a dance studio where Michael could rehearse, guest houses for visitors, beautiful fountains, and a floral clock inspired by the famous entrance to Disneyland. Every corner of Neverland reflected careful planning. Nothing had been added by accident. Everything served a single purpose: to create joy. As the years passed, the cost of building Neverland climbed higher and higher. Millions of dollars were invested into turning one man's dream into reality. But for Michael, the expense wasn't the most important part. What mattered was the smile on a child's face, the laughter echoing across the grounds, and the feeling that, for just one day, the outside world no longer existed. Before long, word of Neverland spread far beyond Hollywood. It wasn't just a ranch anymore. It had become one of the most extraordinary private estates ever created. And soon, people from around the world would discover what it felt like to step inside a place where fantasy seemed completely real. By the early 1990s, Neverland Ranch had become something almost impossible to describe. It wasn't simply a home. It wasn't merely an amusement park. And it certainly wasn't like any celebrity estate the world had ever seen. It had become a world of its own, hidden behind its famous gates. Visitors entered a place where reality seemed to disappear. The first thing many noticed was the railroad. A fully functioning steam train carried guests across the sprawling property. As it rolled along the tracks, passengers passed peaceful lakes, rolling green hills, beautiful gardens, and attractions waiting around every corner. For many children, the journey itself felt like stepping into a storybook. Then came the amusement park. A towering Ferris wheel overlooked the ranch. A colorful carousel spun beneath the California sky. Bumper cars filled with laughter. A pirate ship swinging high above the ground. An octopus ride. A giant slide. Arcades packed with games, and countless surprises waiting to be explored. Unlike traditional theme parks, there were no ticket booths, no waiting lines, no crowds of strangers. Every guest had been personally invited. Beyond the rides, another unforgettable experience awaited: Neverland's private zoo. Children could see giraffes stretching toward the trees, zebras wandering across open fields, chimpanzees playing together, colorful birds filling the air with sound. Even elephants and tigers became part of the extraordinary landscape. For many visitors, it was the first time they had ever seen such animals up close. The main house reflected the same imagination found throughout the ranch. A beautiful Normandy-style mansion stood at the heart of the estate. Inside were spacious living areas, elegant fireplaces, a private library, and rooms filled with artwork collected from around the world. Nearby, a private movie theater welcomed family and friends for screenings. A professional dance studio gave Michael a place to rehearse new performances whenever inspiration arrived. Every detail reflected his creativity. One of Neverland's most remarkable features wasn't built for celebrities at all. It was built for children. Throughout the year, Michael welcomed thousands of young visitors through charitable organizations. Many were seriously ill. Others came from disadvantaged communities. Hospitals arranged special trips. Charities organized family visits. For one unforgettable day, those children could forget treatments, forget difficult circumstances, and simply enjoy being kids. Friends who spent time at Neverland often described an atmosphere unlike anywhere else. There was no schedule, no pressure, no formal rules beyond treating everyone with kindness, whether guests wanted to ride the train, watch a movie, feed the animals, or simply walk through the gardens. The choice was theirs. For Michael, that freedom mattered. He believed childhood should be filled with imagination, not limitations. Over time, Neverland welcomed actors, musicians, athletes, royalty, and world-famous personalities. Yet despite its extraordinary visitors, the ranch was never designed to impress celebrities. Its true purpose remained exactly as Michael had imagined: creating happiness. For a while, that dream seemed complete. Neverland became one of the most admired private properties on Earth, a symbol of generosity, wonder, and imagination. But dreams, no matter how extraordinary, can sometimes change without warning, and before long, Neverland would find itself at the center of a story that would alter its future forever. For years, Neverland Ranch represented joy. Children laughed as trains circled the property. Families explored the gardens. The amusement rides never seemed to stop. To the outside world, it looked like a place where imagination had no limits. But everything changed in 1993. Allegations involving Michael Jackson suddenly dominated headlines around the world. Television stations interrupted regular programming. Newspapers filled their front pages with the story: Within days, Neverland was no longer being discussed as a magical retreat. It had become the center of one of the biggest media stories of the decade. Reporters gathered outside the famous gates. Helicopters circled overhead. News crews broadcast live from the entrance. The peaceful ranch that had been created to escape public attention suddenly became the focus of worldwide scrutiny. As investigations moved forward, law enforcement officers searched the property. The operation attracted enormous media coverage. Every vehicle entering the ranch became breaking news. Every photograph sparked new speculation. Although no criminal charges resulted from the 1993 investigation, the damage to Neverland's image had already begun. The ranch would never again be viewed in quite the same way. Michael continued living there, but according to people close to him, the atmosphere had changed. The place that had once felt like a sanctuary now carried painful memories. Years later, Neverland would once again find itself at the center of global attention. In 2003, new allegations emerged. This time, the investigation led to a highly publicized criminal trial. Once again, the ranch became the subject of non-stop media coverage. Reporters returned to the entrance. Television helicopters filled the skies. Millions of people around the world followed every new development. The legal proceedings lasted for months. Witnesses testified, evidence was presented, and every day of the trial generated international headlines. Finally, in 2005, the case came to an end. A jury found Michael Jackson not guilty on all counts. The verdict closed one of the most closely watched celebrity trials in history. But although the legal case had ended, the emotional impact remained. According to those close to Michael, Neverland no longer felt like the place he had worked so hard to create. The happiness he once associated with the ranch had been replaced by difficult memories. He gradually stopped living there. The dream that had taken years to build was beginning to fade, even though the building still stood. The train tracks remained, and the gardens continued to bloom. Something essential had changed. Neverland was no longer simply a home. It had become a symbol of one of the most difficult periods of Michael Jackson's life. And as the years passed, another challenge was quietly growing behind the scenes, not one involving headlines, but something equally powerful: the enormous cost of keeping Neverland alive. By the mid-2000s, Neverland Ranch was no longer the joyful escape it had once been. The laughter had grown quieter. The train no longer carried excited children every day, and Michael Jackson rarely returned to the place he had once called home. But another problem was becoming impossible to ignore: money. From the beginning, Neverland had never been an ordinary estate. It was a private amusement park, a zoo, a luxury ranch, and a massive residential property all combined into one. Keeping a place like that operating required enormous resources. The amusement rides demanded constant maintenance. The railroad needed repairs and inspections. The exotic animals required daily care from trained professionals. The gardens had to be maintained. The buildings needed upkeep, and security teams protected the property around the clock. Every month, the costs climbed higher. Even for someone as successful as Michael Jackson, maintaining Neverland had become an extraordinary financial burden. At the same time, his personal finances were under increasing pressure. Years of lavish spending, expensive legal battles, and mounting debt had begun to take their toll. Although Michael still owned valuable assets, much of his wealth existed on paper rather than in readily available cash. That created a serious problem. Bills continued arriving. Loans had to be repaid, and Neverland remained one of his most expensive responsibilities. Eventually, financial institutions began taking action. The ranch had been used as collateral for substantial loans. As repayment deadlines approached, there was growing concern that Michael could lose the property entirely. For the first time, the dream he had built from the ground up was in real danger. Then, an unexpected lifeline appeared. In 2008, a partnership was formed to help prevent foreclosure. The agreement restructured ownership of the ranch and provided the financial support needed to keep the property from being seized. The immediate crisis was avoided, but everything had changed. Neverland was no longer simply Michael Jackson's private sanctuary. Its future had become tied to complex financial arrangements. Although the ranch remained standing, the emotional connection Michael once felt toward it had largely disappeared. He rarely visited. Friends said he no longer saw Neverland as the peaceful refuge it had once been. The place that had symbolized imagination and freedom now reminded him of difficult years filled with legal battles, public scrutiny, and financial pressure. The dream that had inspired millions was slowly slipping away. No one realized it at the time, but Michael Jackson would never again live at Neverland Ranch. Within just a few years, the world would lose the man who created it, and the future of Neverland would become more uncertain than ever before. After the events that changed his life, Michael Jackson made a decision few people expected. He left Neverland Ranch, the place he had spent years creating, the place that had once represented happiness, would no longer be his home. For many fans, it was difficult to understand. How could someone simply walk away from a dream that had cost so much time, so much money, and so much emotion? The answer wasn't found in the buildings, or the gardens, or the amusement rides. It was found in the memories, according to people close to Michael. Neverland no longer felt like the peaceful sanctuary it had once been. The investigations, the constant media attention, and the years of public scrutiny had changed everything. The ranch no longer represented escape. Instead, it reminded him of one of the most difficult periods of his life. Although Michael remained the property's owner, he spent very little time there after 2005. Instead, he traveled frequently, living in different locations while continuing to work on new music and future projects. Neverland was carefully maintained. Employees continued looking after the estate. The gardens were cared for. The buildings remained in excellent condition. Security stayed in place. But something important was missing: its creator. Without Michael's daily presence, the ranch slowly became quieter. The famous train no longer carried guests through the property. The amusement rides stood still. The zoo became much smaller as many of the animals were relocated over time. The joyful energy that had once filled every corner of Neverland gradually faded. Then, on June 25th, 2009, everything changed forever. News broke that Michael Jackson had died in Los Angeles at the age of 50. The announcement shocked the world. Fans gathered outside hospitals. Radio stations interrupted programming. Television networks switched to continuous coverage. Millions struggled to believe that the king of pop was gone almost immediately. Attention turned back to Neverland. Many believed Michael would be buried there. After all, the ranch had become the place most closely associated with his life. Some even suggested it should become a permanent memorial open to the public. But those plans never became reality. Instead, Michael was privately laid to rest at Forest Lawn Memorial Park in Glendale, California. Neverland remained exactly where it had always been, empty, quiet, and hidden behind its famous gates. For the first time since Michael purchased the property in 1988, the future of Neverland became uncertain. Without the man who had imagined it, who would care for it, who would preserve it, and could such an extraordinary place survive without the person who gave it meaning? Those questions would remain unanswered for years as the ranch stood silently waiting. The world watched to see what would happen next. Because owning one of the most famous private estates on Earth was one thing, finding someone willing to take on its remarkable history was something else entirely. Following Michael Jackson's death, Neverland Ranch entered a future no one had imagined. The gates remained closed, the amusement rides sat silent, the railroad no longer echoed through the hills. For the first time in decades, the world's most famous private estate had no one to call it home. Although the ranch remained breathtaking, its future was uncertain. Maintaining Neverland had never been inexpensive. The property stretched across nearly 2,700 acres. Dozens of buildings required constant upkeep. Roads had to be maintained. Landscaping crews worked year-round. Security remained on duty every day, even without visitors. The cost of preserving the estate remained enormous. Eventually, Michael Jackson's estate faced a difficult reality. Keeping Neverland indefinitely was no longer practical. The decision was made. The ranch would be placed on the market. At first, many believed buyers would compete for the opportunity. After all, this wasn't simply another luxury property. It was one of the most recognizable private estates in the world. Its name alone was known across generations. But selling Neverland proved far more difficult than anyone expected. Potential buyers admired the breathtaking scenery, the peaceful lakes, the mature oak trees, the elegant mansion, and the extraordinary privacy offered by the surrounding countryside. Yet when the conversation turned to ownership, many quietly stepped away. Some worried about the enormous cost of maintaining such a massive estate. Others questioned whether they could ever enjoy real privacy while living in a property forever linked to one of the world's most famous entertainers. Every visit, every renovation, every personal decision would likely become international news. For many wealthy buyers, that attention simply wasn't worth it. As the months turned into years, Neverland remained unsold. The asking price was lowered. Marketing materials focused on the ranch's natural beauty rather than its famous past. Photographs highlighted the vineyards, the rolling hills, the luxury residences, and the peaceful landscape. Most of the amusement rides had already been removed. The zoo was gone. The famous attractions that once defined Neverland had disappeared. The goal was clear: present the property as an extraordinary California ranch, not as a celebrity landmark, even so. Finding the right buyer remained a challenge. For fans, watching Neverland sit empty was deeply emotional. Many hoped it would become a museum honoring Michael's life. Others dreamed it could be preserved exactly as he had left it. But creating a public attraction would require enormous investment, complex planning, and the approval of many different organizations. Those plans never moved forward. Year after year, the famous gates remained closed. The ranch waited quietly until finally, more than a decade after Michael Jackson's passing, an unexpected buyer appeared, not a museum, not an entertainment company, but someone who saw value in the land itself. His decision would give Neverland a new future, while ensuring its remarkable story would continue. For years, Neverland Ranch remained frozen in time. Its famous gates stayed closed. The amusement rides had disappeared. The railroad no longer echoed across the hills. What remained was a peaceful estate surrounded by silence and decades of history. As the property sat on the market, many wondered whether anyone would ever be willing to buy it. The asking price had already been reduced. Real estate experts promoted its natural beauty rather than its celebrity connection. They emphasized the rolling hills, the private lake, the vineyards, and the luxurious residences. Yet one challenge remained impossible to ignore. This wasn't simply a ranch, it was Neverland, a place forever connected to Michael Jackson. For many buyers, that history was simply too overwhelming. Owning Neverland meant inheriting one of the most recognizable properties in the world. Every visit, every renovation, every decision would attract worldwide attention. Years passed without a successful sale. Then, in late 2020, the story finally changed. A billionaire businessman named Ron Burkle purchased the estate. The reported sale price was approximately $22 million, far below the property's original asking price. The sale surprised many observers. Years earlier, the ranch had been listed for nearly $100 million, but maintaining an estate of this size required enormous financial commitment. Its famous history also limited the number of potential buyers. For Burkle, the purchase wasn't driven by celebrity. He had known Michael Jackson personally for many years. According to public reports, yet he viewed the property primarily as a valuable real estate investment and appreciated its remarkable location in California's Santa Ynez Valley. By the time ownership changed, Neverland already looked very different from the place millions remembered. The Ferris wheel was gone. The carousel had been removed. The zoo no longer existed. The miniature railroad had stopped operating. Without those famous attractions, the ranch had gradually returned to something much closer to a traditional luxury estate. Yet, despite those changes, its identity remained unmistakable. People around the world still recognized the name Neverland, not because of what remained on the property, but because of the memories attached to it. Following the purchase, the new owner kept the estate largely out of public view. No major tourist attraction was created. No public museum opened its doors. Instead, the ranch remained private, quiet, and carefully maintained behind its famous gates. For many fans, that was bittersweet. Some had hoped Neverland would become a permanent tribute to Michael Jackson's life. Others believed preserving its privacy was the more respectful choice. Even today, opinions remain divided, but one thing is undeniable. Although Neverland now belongs to someone else, its story will always be connected to the artist who transformed an ordinary ranch into one of the most extraordinary private estates the world has ever known. And while ownership may have changed, the legend of Neverland continues to capture the imagination of millions. Today, Neverland Ranch is almost unrecognizable from the place millions remember. The laughter that once echoed through the hills has faded, the carnival music is gone, the famous steam train no longer circles the property, and the gates remain firmly closed to the public. Yet behind those gates, the estate still exists, quietly, peacefully, preserved by time, spread across nearly 2,700 acres of California countryside. Neverland remains one of the most breathtaking private properties in America. Rolling hills stretch toward the horizon, centuries-old oak trees line the winding roads, peaceful lakes reflect the surrounding mountains, and the landscape that first captured Michael Jackson's imagination remains remarkably unchanged. Many of the original buildings still stand. The grand main residence continues to overlook the property. Guest houses remain carefully maintained. The gardens are still beautifully landscaped, the private theater, the dance studio, and many of the estate's original structures continue to reflect the elegance of Michael's vision. But anyone who visited Neverland during its golden years would immediately notice what is missing. The Ferris wheel is gone, the carousel no longer spins, the bumper cars have disappeared, the pirate ship ride is no longer there, the miniature railroad has fallen silent, Even the famous zoo no longer exists. Most of the exotic animals were relocated years before the ranch changed ownership. Without those attractions, Neverland feels completely different. It no longer resembles a private amusement park. Instead, it has returned to what it once was before Michael transformed it. A peaceful luxury ranch surrounded by extraordinary natural beauty. Despite its privacy, Neverland continues attracting worldwide attention. Fans still travel to the entrance hoping to catch a glimpse of the famous gates. Photographs of the property continue circulating online, documentaries revisit its remarkable history, and every new image sparks fresh conversations among people who grew up watching Michael Jackson create one of the most extraordinary homes ever built. For many, Neverland represents something much larger than real estate. It represents imagination, hope, childhood, and one man's determination to build a place unlike anything the world had ever seen. Others see it differently. They remember the controversies that surrounded the ranch and the difficult years that followed. Both perspectives have become part of Neverland's history, because history is rarely defined by only its brightest moments. It remembers every chapter, the joyful ones, the painful ones, and everything in between. Today, Neverland remains hidden behind its gates, protected from public access. Quiet once again, yet somehow, its story continues reaching millions of people around the world. Not because of what visitors can see today, but because of what the ranch came to symbolize: a dream, a refuge, a place built from imagination. And although the attractions have disappeared, the legend of Neverland remains as powerful as ever, because some places are remembered not for what they look like, but for the memories they leave behind. More than 3 decades have passed since Michael Jackson first imagined a place unlike any other on Earth, a place where laughter echoed through the hills, where trains carried smiling children across the countryside, where imagination was given a home. That place became known as Neverland. Today, the rides are gone. The animals have moved on. The gates remain closed. And the man who created it is no longer there. Yet somehow, Neverland continues to live on, not because of its buildings, not because of its famous entrance, and not because of the land itself, but because of what it came to represent. For Michael Jackson, Neverland was never just a luxury estate. It was his attempt to create something he believed the world needed more of: wonder, kindness, and the freedom to dream without limits. Throughout the years, thousands of children visited the ranch through charitable organizations. Many were battling serious illnesses. Others came from difficult circumstances. For one unforgettable day, they weren't patients. They weren't facing hardship. They were simply children enjoying a world built entirely for happiness. Those memories remain part of Neverland's true legacy. Of course, history also remembers the difficult chapters: the investigations, the media attention, the legal battles, and the controversies that forever changed how many people viewed the ranch. Those events became part of Neverland's story as well, because no place connected to someone as famous as Michael Jackson could ever be remembered through only one perspective. History preserves every chapter: the dreams, the triumphs, the heartbreak, and the questions that continue to spark conversation years later. Yet despite everything, the name Neverland still carries extraordinary meaning. Mention it almost anywhere in the world, and people immediately think of Michael Jackson. Very few private homes have become so deeply connected to a single individual. Its owner may have changed, its appearance may have changed, but its identity never has. Perhaps that's because Neverland was never really about amusement rides or beautiful gardens. It was about an idea: the belief that childhood should be protected, that imagination should never disappear, and that joy is something worth creating whenever possible. Whether people remember Michael Jackson as one of the greatest performers in music history, a remarkable entertainer, or simply as an artist whose work transformed popular culture, few would deny the lasting influence he left behind. His music continues reaching new generations. His performances remain studied by dancers and musicians around the world. His creativity still inspires concerts, music videos, and stage productions decades after they first amazed audiences. Neverland became an extension of that same imagination, a reflection of the man who dreamed far beyond what most people believed was possible. In the end, the ranch tells a story much greater than architecture or real estate. It tells the story of a dream built with extraordinary ambition, shaped by remarkable success, tested by unimaginable challenges, and remembered long after its creator was gone. Perhaps that is why Neverland continues to fascinate millions of people today, not because of what still stands behind its gates, but because of what those gates once opened into: a world where imagination came first, where happiness mattered most, and where, for a little while, reality seemed to disappear. Some dreams eventually fade, others become history, but a rare few continue inspiring people long after they have changed. Neverland is one of those dreams, and that is why its story will never truly end. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this documentary, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you never miss our next story. Until next time, thank you for watching.